healing was like this destination that you arrived at. It was like this magical world where everything was wonderful and nice, and you were perfect and your skin glowed. It was like an arrival point, like a period that you got to, or crossing a finish line. Boy, was I wrong. Now I know that healing or getting past your past is it's more like a comma. It's like the pauses in a good story. But it took me a while to figure that part out. In 2012, I was in Cambodia. I was working at a sex trafficking rehabilitation center, and I happened to be with my best friend. And in a rare moment of Wi-Fi accessibility, I checked my phone and I had received an email. And the email was from a curator of an event that I was speaking at when I returned to the States in just a few weeks. And in the email, he said, hey, I know that you usually speak about trafficking and activism, but this time we were hoping you'd do something a little different. Do you mind coming in and talking about your personal story of overcoming childhood and trauma? Now, I don't know about you guys, but I have other things I could be doing on a Sunday afternoon. That was pretty much the last thing that I wanted to do in life in general. I mean, at that point, I was still pretty dismissive when it came to my personal history. I minimized it, I rationalized it, I was like, it's not that bad. I mean, I didn't think, I kind of knew that I had stuff I could probably work out, but the cost seemed like too much for the effort. So I looked over to my friend as I got this email and I said to her, hey, I don't know what they're talking about. Like, my childhood wasn't that bad. They wanted me to come in and talk about it. And she looked at me and she said, well, look who's still stuck in the brothel. Excuse me? I was stunned. Stunned, to put it nicely. And she continued. She said, well, you're the one that's always telling all of these women that they shouldn't be ashamed of their story. And it looks like you still are. All right, fine. I kind of gathered myself and was like, fine, you know what? I'll go first. Now, I mean, that was like sort of like this act of defiance, like, I'll show you. And I had no idea what I was committing myself to. That moment in Cambodia started this long process of healing, of figuring out what accepting our story looks like, committing to the process of healing. Like I said, I thought it was this like grand thing, this accomplishment that you achieved, and embracing that it's actually a process, it's this long journey. Now let me back up quickly. When I was in high school, I was busy. I had things to do. I was a runner, I was a swimmer, I was in drama club, I was a pizza delivery girl with my pink neon. I know. And I was on Sea Turtle Patrol. Let me play that back for you. I was on Sea Turtle Patrol. Thank you. I felt pretty important doing it. So I was just this high achiever. I was an honor student. I was going. But the reality was, I was totally running and avoiding my pain. I mean, at home, it was a completely different story. I grew up with just my biological maternal grandparents, and when I was a toddler, my identical twin and I got into some really random freak accident, and she was killed. And then my grandmother passed right after that, and then it was just my grandfather and I. Now, parents in the audience, can you imagine being 70 years old and suddenly having to take care of a teenage girl? I mean, that's a job that I wouldn't want now, and I have to hand it to him. He tried his best. But the reality was, he coped the best way he knew, and that was with alcohol, which made him like Jekyll and Hyde. One moment he was the kindest, most compassionate guy you could ever be around, and the next minute he was violent and angry. And the most frustrating part about all of it was that it was so hard to figure out why I made him angry. I couldn't figure it out, and therefore I couldn't figure out how to make him happy. So at home, I was just going, like I tried to avoid everything. Now, in addition to my really chaotic home life, I figured out a way out. And that was, at first I decided I was going to be a doctor. And then I decided, well, I could help people fix their problems on TV, so I should be a talk show host. Makes sense, right? So when my grandfather passed away, it was right after my high school graduation. On a whim, I had found a picture of a half-sister that I didn't know existed. So I decided to move to New York City and try and find her. And I decided to join acting school, because I thought that made logical sense. If I could be on TV, maybe that would up my chances of finding my biological family. Well, there's something about acting that I didn't know. You guys probably know this already, but it requires this thing called vulnerability. And at that point, I had prided myself on how emotionless I was. In fact, my college boyfriend used to call me the ice queen. In arguments, because I was just blank. I wasn't joyful, but I wasn't sad, and I didn't experience my pain. So when my acting teacher picked up on the fact that I had all these emotional blocks, or as I like to refer it, the Great Wall of China surrounding my heart, he suggested I go to counseling. Now, at 21, I had already survived all this stuff. The last thing I wanted to do was go backwards. But sometimes going back to the beginning is the only way to move forward. And in my first counseling session, my counselor, bless her, she really had her work cut out for her. She looked at me and she said, "So, how are you feeling?" And my reaction was, "How am I feeling? How do you want me to feel? What does that mean? Let me ask you a better question. How are you feeling?" It was a long journey. And I sort of played around with going to recovery. I mean, I had to, right? In order to stay in acting school, my teacher was like, you have to be emotive to be an actor. So in order to stay in, I had to learn what emotions I had. I really didn't have any feelings anymore. And so we struggled. I went back and forth with counseling, so I like to call it like kind of like a cat does with the dead mouse. You know, they just bat it around, they kind of play with it, and then they drop off the consequences at the doorstep of someone they love. Sorry, babe. Love you. I had no idea how much this trauma was impacting me. And now that I'm in the mental health world, I know that unaddressed trauma has all these crazy consequences. You've probably heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, or disassociation, which means you kind of just zone out. I was the queen at zoning out. I would forget weeks or days that went by. I had no idea what happened. There are all these other things like inability to focus, or struggling believing in yourself. That was a big one for me. I just couldn't fathom that somebody would love me or that I was valuable. So the process of healing was a very long one, and the commitment, I just resisted it a lot. And it wasn't until that moment in Cambodia that I was like, man, if I'm ever going to have a chance at a healthy family, or maybe even become a parent myself, I'm going to really have to commit and do this work, which is the last thing that I wanted to do. Now, some people might say, I have this friend actually who recently said to me, why does this stuff keep happening to you? I know a lot of stuff happens to a lot of people, but the same stuff just keeps happening to you. Thanks a lot. But the statistics tell us that actually victims of child abuse or neglect or sexual violence as children, the likelihood that we will be re-perpetrated against or re-abused is crazy high, which is insane if you think about it, because 1 in 4 girls are already sexually abused and 1 in 6 boys are. So for me, a lot of people think, why is that? And part of it has to do with the way our brain changes when we experience prolonged toxic stress. It literally changes our brain, not in a bad way, but not in a good way either. What helped us survive as a kid kind of limits us as an adult. So going back to that moment in Cambodia where I had this epiphany of I need to step up my game, I came back to the States and I was really reluctant still to do this speech. And it came to the day and I still had nothing to say. I just was blank inside my head. And so we're sitting in the audience and the curator of the event leans over to me and he says, so do you have any notes that you want to take up with you? And I started laughing hysterically and crying simultaneously. I was just like, I don't know, what do you want? What do you want to say? And on my head, all I kept thinking was, whatever you do not talk about depression and suicide. And as I walked up to the stage, I was just like repeating that in my head. And then I had this one moment of clarity. I remember this one time when I was around 9 years old, and I had retreated to my bedroom because my grandfather was like super angry with me for something. Who knows? And I couldn't figure out how to make him not be angry with me anymore. And I had like a moment where just like a small voice said to me, if I can survive my childhood, then I hope my story can help someone else one day. That's what took me up to the stage. And I ended up sharing just my guts. The whole talk ended up becoming about depression and suicide ideation, the last thing that I wanted to become about. So when I finished, I stood there quietly, and the audience was silent. And in my head, I was just like, man, this was a huge mistake. And slowly, like a golf clap, people started applauding. And then afterwards, I was greeted with audience members who, in hearing my story, found the strength to put words to their story. And at the end of it, a guy came up to me. He was like sort of dressed in this nice business suit. And he approached me and he said, hey, I want to talk to you. And I was like, I'm having a vulnerability hangover, so I want to go hide. Okay, yeah, what do you want to talk about? And he was like, I had no idea that your speech was going to be about depression and suicide. And I was like, I had no idea either. Sorry, but continue. And he said, no, you don't understand. This morning I woke up and I had decided that I was going to kill myself. Oh, wow. And I looked online and I saw that there was a speech happening today, so on a whim, I decided to come. If you can make it, so can I. So can you. If Washington can make it, so can we. The reality is, yes, the struggle is real, but so is redemption, so is hope, and so is healing. That day that I decided to go first was the day that changed the rest of my life, so I'm inviting you to do the same. Go first. Accept your story. Commit to the process of healing. Embrace that it's a journey, and I promise you that one day you might be helping someone else live out their story as well.